My father was hit by a missile. My mother saw a shrapnel in his chest and his leg was hurt. We looked for an ambulance but couldn't find one. My mother was screaming, but I told her, "Don't cry, my father is in heaven."
Over half of children who are not in school across the globe live in countries plagued by war. Conflict is robbing them of an education, of a brighter future. For some children, war or the threat of war is a constant, a shadow that hangs heavy over the schoolyard. War might mean you don't have a school to go to at all because it's been destroyed and the teachers have fled or been killed. In Somalia, for instance, it's estimated that a whole generation has lost out on an education because the fighting has lasted years. The long-running Israeli-Palestinian conflict has wrecked much, and education is one of the casualties. Katya Adler reports from Gaza.
School time in Gaza. The streets are crowded. Most people who live here are under 18. 9-year-old Huda and her brother and sister set off from their makeshift home. Their real one was bombed earlier this year in a war with Israel. Their school, run by the United Nations, came under attack too. People in the school said it was raining fire that day. Israel launched white phosphorus, it says was aimed at protecting Israeli soldiers from Palestinian gunmen. But the school was packed with families sheltering from the war. 2 little brothers were killed here. Women and children were wounded. Some classrooms burnt beyond recognition. They've since been repainted, but the children's memories of that day can't be erased. Everything was burnt and destroyed here, Mahmoud told us. How can we forget the war? Lots of people died. The Israelis bombed our things. Why shouldn't we get an education like they do? It's our right to live in freedom and safety. Israel's military offensive is over, but it still wants to punish Gaza's government, run by men who believe Israel shouldn't exist. Israel limits supplies coming into Gaza, so rebuilding war damage is almost impossible. Life for everyone here is tough. People here in Gaza say they feel they're living in an open-air prison, and because of tensions with Israel, say they're always waiting for the next war, and there's nowhere to run. The borders with Gaza are sealed shut. So the kids of Gaza say however much education they get, their future feels bleak.
What's the time?
What's the
Time number 2, what's the time?
Teachers in Gaza say living in a war zone affects children's performance at school. Huda, like many of her friends, suffers from nightmares. At night, I dream the Israelis will come back and bomb us, Huda told me. I'm scared. At school, we study and play, but we still remember the days of the war. Between Israeli airstrikes and Palestinian gunmen firing rockets from their neighborhoods, being a child in Gaza means growing up with conflict.
During the war, according to the UN, 7 schools were destroyed and another 159 damaged in Gaza. Across the border, 9 Israeli schools and kindergartens were hit by Hamas rockets. Katya Adler spoke to 2 students on the other side of the border in the town of Sderot.
So, when a rocket is fired from Gaza, what happens next? You guys are at school, what happens?
The children start to run to safety place. They start to call their family, and they all the time in the mind that something can happen with their little brother in the kindergarten, or something with their parents. And some cry, some shake, and we can concentrate it in our classes.
When you talk to school children in Gaza, they say, look at us, so many of us are killed in wars with Israel, whereas in Sderot, not many children die, not many are injured, not many rockets are actually fired.
I have a cousin that lost his legs, 2 cousins actually. In Gaza war, my brother came to me some days and said, I'm going to die. It's unusual, it's not normal that 5 or 6 years old will tell it to his brother.
I have a message for the other side. We don't hate them. And we want peace and we don't want wars. We want to be friends.
It is one of the real tragedies of war, the destruction not just of lives and property, but also human potential.